Hello, this is Mike Kramer, Calibration Program Manager at Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. And I want to welcome you all and thank you for attending this month's webinar. As you can see, today's topic is going to center around Section 4.4, which is a review of request tenders and contracts within ISO 17025. 2005. And for those of you that may be signing in for the first time, and as a reminder for the others, this webinar is being recorded. Will be available in its entirety on PJL's website under the resource tab. We do have a section on recorded webinars. And so if you have a colleague that you may feel would benefit from revisiting today's presentations, feel free to check out our website and listen to this presentation again. Also, there's a wealth of information up there. We actually have recorded webinars going back to 2012, so you may see another topic of interest, and you can click on any particular webinar and hear the actual presentation. Okay, as I stated, today's topic is request tenders and contracts, Section 4.4. So a quick synopsis of this topic. The requirement for recorded contract review in ISO 17025 formalizes the process of interaction with the client on the selection of a method, the responsibility of the laboratory to ensure, as far as it is possible, to make sure the client receives a service which meets their needs. Moreover, the laboratory must be satisfied before accepting the work that it has the capabilities and resources to conduct it. In practice, any responsible laboratory will go through this process anyway, but ISO 17025 requires it to be formalized and recorded. So many of these things we just stated will be captured in the requirements, and we'll be looking at these things individually. So 17025 requires testing and calibration to implement a procedure by which it conducts requests, tenders, and contracts. And as stated, this is currently Section 4.4 of the standard. So request, tenders, and contracts. So we're looking at three different things there. So request, tenders, and contract are three different activities. Initially, a request is received from the client for a scope of work. The lab, in response, makes a tender or a proposal to the client. The tender may include clarification of the scope of work, scheduling information, monetary compensation, etc. And then lastly, a contract is the agreement between the client and the lab. This can be a purchase order from the client to the lab as the actual contract. If the work is identified as routine in the sense the lab has validated document and appropriate procedures, and perhaps all that is needed is for the laboratory to ensure it can meet the client's requirements on turnaround. However, if the work is not identified as routine, then it will be necessary for the laboratory to determine whether it can accept it. This will require an assessment of whether the necessary equipment and expertise is available. A method will also have to be identified and arrangements made to validate it. About there, I just put two examples there. One is this is for a mass calibration lab, i.e. 10 50-pound weights, class F, maybe pretty routine, something that perhaps they get in every day, something that's well within their scopes of accreditation. Something that may be non-routine for this particular calibration would be if a customer called and had a set of Newton precision slotted weights. Hence, they have taken a specific gravity, have to look at different tolerances. something like that. It may be something that would be new to the lab, and it's something they have to investigate just to assure that they have the equipment, the resources, and the capability to meet the customer's requirements. So delving right into section 4.4 and the individual requirements, we're going to look at each one of them individually and expand a little bit on them. So 4.4.1, the laboratory shall establish and maintain procedures for the review of requests, tenders, and contracts. The policies and procedures for these reviews leading to a contract for testing and calibration shall ensure that. See, I highlighted ensure, so at the bottom you see ensure does not require it to be defined in the procedure. However, it needs to be ensured, doesn't have to be defined in the procedure. A, the requirements including the method to be used are adequately defined and documented and understood. Section 5.4.2, it says C. There are several sections in the standard that sort of crosswalks back to this section. So we're going to hit on a few of those during the course of presentation. So we'll look at 5.4.2 here in a moment, which is method and method validation. So let's look at that. It says a requirement including the method to be used are adequately defined, documented, and understood. Defined as a document, i.e. a document is something that tells you how to do something, while documented is a record. So in other words, a record tells you what's been done. Hence, once the pen hits the paper, it becomes a record. So we're looking for both document, then we're looking for objective evidence via records that this process is actually, there's objective evidence being presented that the process is actually being implemented. Okay, still on 4.4.1. I believe that should be B there. The laboratory has the capabilities and resources to meet the requirements. Okay, italics, and they're my words are written down there. And when you see italicized documentation on this presentation. So I'm looking at that, and this should include a clear understanding of any tolerance, specifications, or accuracy requirements on behalf of the client, and if the laboratory have the capabilities. These may require a careful evaluation of the laboratory's uncertainties or detection limits to determine if, in fact, they can meet the customer's requirements, i.e. they want something tested or calibrated to fall within a specific tolerance. Laboratory needs to assure that they have the capabilities to meet those tolerance or specifications limits established by their clients. Resources has a capability and resources. That usually means things such as manpower or facility capacity. And the laboratory needs to ensure, C, the appropriate test and recalibration method is selected and is capable of meeting the customer's requirements. So often the client may request a testing or calibration service with the willingness to have that done by whatever method the lab determines most appropriate. Hence, so your vendors are, your clients are coming to you, especially if you're a 17025 accredited facility, which that 17025 accreditation is basically stating you have been evaluated, you meet the standards, and you are technically competent to perform the test or calibrations under your scope of accreditation. So hence, the way I like to put it is they're looking at you as the experts. So they're putting it in your hands that you are, of course, going to follow through to specify, to test the artifact, to be tested, or perhaps the equipment to be calibrated by whatever test method which you determine as the expert to be the most appropriate. So, for example, some requests you may get in would be calibrate pipettes to manufacturer specifications. That's maybe the request from the customer as far as the excuse me, the procedure or method that's going to be placed in the hands of the laboratory. Test water samples to determine if it meets grade 3 requirements. Again, normally the client's not going to specify, unless it's mandated somewhere along the line, that is being done by a specific procedure. They're looking to you, the calibration or testing lab, as the experts, and hence is willing to have that done by whatever method the lab determines is most, excuse me, most appropriate. Okay, once again, during contract review, calibration labs should specifically discuss their measurement uncertainty with their clients to ensure that they can meet the client's specification. Likewise, accredited labs requesting calibration should ask their calibration providers about measurement uncertainty before procuring those services to ensure that they receive the services and information they require. Again, 542, this is mentioned within section 4.4. 5.4 is the calibration method, testing method, and method validation section. States the laboratory shall use, test, and or calibration methods, including methods for sampling, which meets the needs of their customers. Also, the laboratory shall inform the customer when the method proposed by the customer is considered to be inappropriate or out of date. Hence, for whatever reason your customer is specifying, I've actually seen this before doing assessments and also working in laboratory standards that were referred to as NBS under the old National Bureau of Standards before they became the National Institute of Standards, that I knew long have been superseded by other standards. Whenever that happens, if for whatever reason the customer is proposing method, but you all as the expert know is inappropriate, it's your job to inform the customer of that fact. Okay, continuing with section 4.4. 4.4.1 states, any differences between the request or tenders and the contract shall be resolved before the work commences. Each contract shall be accepted to the laboratory, shall be accepted both to the laboratory and the customer. Hence, if we go from the request, and then we go to the tender, and if something has been changed, that needs to be communicated. And then if we go from the tender to the actual contract, any changes between the tender and the contract shall be communicated and resolved before any actual testing or calibration work commence. I want to highlight a couple notes given within the standards. Notes are given within 17025 to provide clarification of the text, give some examples and guidance. So got three of them here. Note 1, the request, tenders, and contract review should be conducted in a practical and efficient manner, and the effect of financial, legal, and time scheduled aspects should be taken into account. For internal customers, review of request, tenders, and contracts can be performed in a simplified way. We're all going to look at this a little bit further toward the end of this presentation when it comes to reporting the results. But an internal customer would be if you are, for example, a calibration or a testing lab that's within a manufacturing facility, where you're doing work, say, just for your company. That's what it's being referred to here as internal customers. Note number 2, the review of capabilities should establish that the laboratory possesses the necessary physical, personal, and information resources, and the laboratory's personnel have the skills and expertise necessary for the performance of the testing or calibrations in question. The review may also encompass results of earlier participation in interlaboratory comparisons or proficiency testing and or running a trial test or calibration program using samples or items of known value in order to determine uncertainty of measurements, limits of detecting, confidence limits, etc. Oftentimes those avenues, interlaboratory comparison, repeatability studies, intralab studies can be actually utilized in order as quantifiable components into the uncertainty of the testing in our calibration lab. Finally, note number 3 here, a contract may be written or oral agreement to provide a customer with a testing and or calibration services. Hence, the oral agreement that's not specifying a contract has to be written. However, if you recall, we stated earlier, you need to maintain those records. Hence, if an oral agreement was reached, somewhere along the lines, that agreement should be documented somewhere in the form of a record. So once again, a contract is not required to just be written. It could also be an oral agreement between the laboratory and its customers. Okay, 442. Records of reviews, including any significant changes, shall be maintained. Records shall also be maintained of pertinent discussions with a customer relating to the customer's requirements or the results of the work during the period of execution of the contract. So again, this is just, again, yeah, you need to maintain your records. If I'm doing an assessment, I just typically would point blank when I get to 442, ask where these records of pertinent discussions would be maintained. It could be maintained electronically. It could be maintained within hard files that are being maintained in file cabinets within the laboratory. So we're looking for the records of the reviews of the tenders and the contract, and they are expected to be kept within the confines of the laboratory. One thing I failed to mention, I typically do mention this at the opening of the presentation, is toward the end of this presentation, at the very end actually, there'll be if you have any questions, there is a spot on your computer. You should be for submitting questions. So when we're done with the presentation, if you have any questions, you'll be given the opportunity to submit those questions. At the end, I will give you time to do that at the end of this presentation, and then signing back in, I'll review the questions and answer to the best of my ability any questions that may have funneled their way back to myself. Okay, we're going to look at another note. We realize, routine work, that's may very well be the bulk of the work that comes in, could be considered as routine work. So again, another note within the standard for review of routine and other simple tasks, the date identification, ID, that's the initial of the person in the laboratory responsible for carrying out the contract at work are considered adequate. For repetitive routine tasks, the review need to be made only at the initial inquiry stage or on granting of the contract for an ongoing routine work performed under a general agreement with the customers, provided that the customer's requirements remain unchanged. For new complex or advanced testing and or calibration tasks, a more comprehensive record should be maintained. So in other words, if you enter into an agreement with a customer, having a signed contract, work comes in periodically through the course of the year, everything that comes in would default to that original contract. The person who is familiar with the contract and responsible for carrying out the contract at work would just basically review and sign off on the incoming work. Okay, 443 under request tenders and contracts deals with subcontracting. The review shall also cover work that is subcontracted by the laboratory. Although you folks have attended my webinars previously, emphasize the fact that shall is a requirement. So a shall is a requirement and must be complied with. So basically, if any work is going to be subcontracted, the request tenders and contract section does apply to it. Keep in mind, as per section 4.5, this is the actual section within 17025 on testing and calibration. A couple of things that can be crosswalked back to section 4.4, request tenders and contract. 4.5.2 states, the laboratory shall advise the customer of the arrangements in writing and, when appropriate, gain the approval of the customers, preferably in writing. So hence, if you are subcontracting the work, you're not only going to comply with 4.4, you're also going to comply with this requirement under subcontracting that you have to inform the customer in writing. And just bear in mind, 4.5.3 states the laboratory is responsible to the customers for the subcontractor's work, except in the case where the customer or a regulatory authority specifies which subcontractor is to be used. Okay, 4.4.4, the customer shall be informed of any deviations from the contract. Pretty self-explanatory there. So if you have an agreement with a customer, a contract, using a purchase order, if anything changes, and as you see at the bottom of the screen here, a deviation, which I define as a planned or temporary change, shall be communicated to the customer. So if things happen, if things are in agreement with, say, turnaround time, for example, and perhaps you had a power outage that affected your equipment, hence you're not going to be able to maintain an agreement of for example, a 2-3 day turnaround. If an instance like that, something's going to change, the customer shall be informed of any deviation from the contract. All right, the very last requirement stated in 4.4.5, if a contract needs to be amended after work has started, the same contract review process shall be repeated and any amendments shall be communicated to all affected personnel. So for whatever reason, either party decides the contract, there needs to be a change made, the process needs to be repeated. The review, the request, the tender, and the contract, all phases would need to repeat itself, emphasizing, of course, what needs to be amended from, the initial contract. All right, we're going to visit a couple other sections in the standard that I think they relate to 4.4. First one I want to look at is in 4.6.3, which 4.6 is the section on purchasing, and these are critical supplies and services. 4.6.3, purchasing documents for items affecting the quality of laboratory output shall contain data describing the services and supplies ordered. These purchasing documents shall be reviewed and approved for technical content prior to release. Hence, this is more so on your client's part. So, if they are going to utilize a purchase order, for example, and send an artifact to be calibrated or a sample to be tested, that document should contain enough data describing the services and supplies that they are requesting, where the testing and calibration lab is in it, that would be absolutely sure, and if they're not sure, should open lines of communication to their client. For example, if you're a calibration laboratory and you have different levels of calibration, and you have a purchase order that says, and I've seen this on an assessment before, please calibrate, please certify, something like that. That's not enough information. Hence, the lab generating the purchase order, if they were actually a 17025 accreditation, or not fulfilling the requirements of 4.6.3. But I feel you, our accredited facility or an organization who is accredited to perform work under 17025 accreditation, under 4.6.3, who are reviewing these documents on the service provider's end, should assure that these documents, purchase order or whatever comes with the artifact or sample, are clear, and they should be reviewed for technical content. So ideally, you like to see perhaps the technical manager's eyes on these purchasing documents. Again, these are for critical supplies and services, where you might have to have someone with the technical knowledge to be placing these orders to the calibration or testing laboratories. 5.8.3. 5.8 is the handling of calibration items. So this is, you've received the item to test or to calibrate. Upon receipt of the test or calibration item, abnormalities or departures from normal or specified conditions as described in the test or calibration method shall be recorded. When there is doubt as to the suitability of an item for test or calibration, or when an item does not conform to the description provided, or the test or calibration required is not specified in sufficient detail, the laboratory shall consult the customer for further instructions before proceeding and shall record the discussion. Hence, that last sentence I read in regards to not being provided sufficient detail sort of goes hand in hand with what we just read in section 4.6.3. So this would be a thing such as if perhaps you got something that was damaged. Perhaps, let's say the client was sending in pipettes to calibrate, and the packing was specified 10, you received 9. These abnormalities should be recorded and should be communicated directly with your customers. Again, this is not under 4.4, but they relate to request tenders and contracts, section 4.4. We're going to look at 4.7, service to the customer. 4.7.1, the laboratory shall be willing to cooperate with customers or representative in clarifying the customer's request and in monitoring the laboratory's performance in relation to the work performed, provided that the laboratory ensures confidentiality to other customers. A note, providing the customer or customer's representative reasonable access to relevant area of the laboratory for witnessing of test and or calibration performed for the customer. So this is basically stating, and particularly with the note, if your customer wants to basically come on your facility and watch what you folks do best, performing the testing under your scope or calibration. Should provide them that cooperation, provided that you ensure the confidentiality of other customers. So if you had a client that made that particular request, you had other folks, equipment in there to calibrate or samples to test, that needs to be hidden or put out of sight of any other client coming into your facility, just to maintain the confidentiality of your other clients. Okay, 410, section 410 is reporting the results. So again, this is what you're basically, this is the end of the process. You're going to provide your customer with a calibration report or a test report. 510.1, the general section states, the results shall be reported usually in a test report or a calibration certificate, and shall include all the information requested by the customer and necessary for the interpretation of the test or calibration work, and all information required by the method used. In the case of test or calibrations performed for internal customers, or in the case of a written agreement with a customer, the results may be reported in a simplified way. So what this is saying, you may have an external customer that just, for internal purposes, or even an external customer, for whatever reason, they want reported just whether or not their artifact or sample was within specifications or out of specifications. You can do that, provided for external customers, if this agreement is in writing somewhere along that contract review process. It needs to be captured in writing. And you're going to visit records here, section on records 413, which requires, even if it's not reported, everything that's stated within 410, you should have a record of it. So i.e., if for whatever reason your external customer is requesting just compliance to a specification, you need to be able to have a record presented in the laboratory of the actual raw data that was acquired during the performing of that particular test or calibration. Okay, so there's a few other sections that I just wanted to hit on because I feel they can be crosswalked back over to section 4.4. Something that's maybe on the top of everybody's mind right now is 17025 is currently 2005, and it's fairly certain it's going to be revised by the end of the year. I did a webinar several months ago based on the last committee draft, the significant changes within the revised 170, the proposed revised 17025 and 17025 2005. With my webinars from here on out until the 17025 becomes official and becomes, say, for example, 17025 2019, I'm going to look at those sections and look at any significant changes within the section. So looking at the section, there is a section on review, requests, tenders, and contracts. The numbering system is going to be different, but that's going to be for all your sections. Everything that I just went over here in this presentation appears to be captured in the current draft of 17025. There is one addition that's going to be something that's not captured in 17025, and like I said, this is being proposed. It's not final, but I think it's probably fairly good probability that this is the things that are currently in the latest committee draft will make it to the final revised 17025. So under the latest draft 7113 is stating when the customer requests a statement of conformity to a specific, and this is under request tenders and contracts, by the way, when the customer requests a statement of conformity to a specification or standard for the test or calibration, i.e. that's when there is a statement such as a pass-fail, intolerant, or out-of-tolerant, the specification or standard and the decision rule shall be clearly defined unless inherited in the requested specifications or standard. The decision rule selected shall be communicated to the customer. Hence, that's why it comes under request tenders and contracts. So decision rule, that concept comes up in a few areas within the within the standard, primarily when it's going into uncertainty, and also when it's going into reporting the result, that word decision rule. So what is it? It's something that's always been in the standard, but never's been defined. A decision rule is a rule that describes how the measurement uncertainty will be accounted for when making statements of conformity with a specified requirement. So it's always been in the standard. When you make a metrological statement of conformity to a specific specification, tolerance, you have to take uncertainty into account. What this is stating, though, under the review, request, tenders, and contracts, you have to communicate to the customer how this is going to be handled. So in other words, let's say your customer has a set of precision mass standard, class 1. So you have a tolerance associated with those. You're going to report a value, degree of uncertainty, and make the determination whether or not these mass standards actually fall within 1702, ASTM class 1's specifications and tolerance. So uncertainty may affect that. That could be in the case where it could be very close to the tolerance limit, either passing or failing, where if you figure in measurement uncertainty, it could possibly have a false fail, or a something that passed that actually fails, or something that fails that actually passes. I hope that sounded okay there. But what this is stating is during contract review, you have to let your customer know what decision rule you're going to apply. This would be something like guard banding, for example. That's probably the most popular method of taking measurement uncertainty into account. So basically, you're going to have to inform your customer of your guard banding and how you're going to utilize it, take into account when you state that their sample or their equipment for calibration falls within a clearly stated specification. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's presentation on 4.4, Request, Tenders, and Contracts. Again, thank you all for attending. And like I stated earlier, this time will be utilized. If you have any questions about today's presentation, feel free. There should be a place there on your screen to submit questions. Those questions will be fielded by personnel at our headquarters and fielded to myself. So at this time, I'd like to give you folks about 5 minutes to send any questions in. And after that 5 minutes, hopefully have a few funneled toward me that we can look at. Also, want to, if for whatever reason any question remained unanswered, or perhaps you think of something you wish you would have asked before we signed off here, you can submit them directly to webinar@pjalabs.com if that was to happen, and we will communicate back to you in regards to a response to any question that may have come into your head after we have signed off. So at this point, I'm going to be quiet for about 5 minutes, and If you have any questions, please submit them. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Just have a couple questions here, not very many this time. I want to go ahead and pop this screen up for you folks to look at and mark on your calendar. Next month's webinar, we've went ahead and scheduled it for the 20th of July, which I believe is a Thursday. We're going to look at section 4.6, purchasing services and supplies. So we incorporate approved suppliers list and other issues related to this section. Again, I will also look at the latest committee draft on the revised 17025 and highlight any prospective changes that could be coming down the pike in regards to 4.6, purchasing services and supplies. So I just got two questions here. Question number one. Most offers at the time, the customers don't know what method to use. What can the laboratory do? Now, if you're called during the presentation, customers could be sending you artifacts to calibrate, samples to test. They're looking at you folks as the experts. You guys are accredited to do the testing calibration under your scope. If the customer does not clarify a method during their request, perhaps during the tender, you can specify you use the most appropriate method, or when you offer your tender, you can specify a specific method that could be used. Bear in mind, when you finish the process, the method will be defined as required in section 510, reporting the result. So on the calibration report at the end of the whole process, under section 510, it is required that the method be documented on the actual tester calibration report. I realize, and particularly from being on the side of the fence of the calibration lab, that most often the customer does not know what method is to be used, and basically they're relying on the laboratory as the expert to determine that. I would, however, if it's not specified during the request, perhaps maybe solidify some, keep a record of it when you as the laboratory offers the tenders back to your client. Question number two: how far can we go up to subcontracting, considered as a spec gas lab, because this is a testing lab, due to the analysis capability? Well, the one thing I want to emphasize, subcontracting, particularly if you're doing this under your scope of accreditation, what you can subcontract and still consider it as an accredited work utilizing, if you're accredited with PJLA, the PJLA logo is what's currently under your scope of accreditation. You can't subcontract anything, even if it's capabilities wise. Let's say within your scope of accreditation, you have ranges that is specified. You can calibrate between, let's go to weights again. You can calibrate between a milligram and a kilogram. You have the capabilities to do class 1 weights. And you have to bear with me. I realize you're a testing lab. I am the calibration program manager, so I tend to think a little bit more in those terms. And you have to request to do work at the 2 kJ level for a class 1 type of weight. You cannot subcontract under your scope of accreditation. I hope I'm making the correlation here between this and a gas lab, your question there. So not to say you can't subcontract it. You can subcontract it, but you just cannot do it under your scope of accreditation. So anything that's not under your capability or capacity under your scope of accreditation, you cannot subcontract that out and present it as an accredited calibration under your scope of accreditation. Of course, you can always act as a middleman, contract it out to another accredited facility that may in fact be accredited to do the work, and of course communicate this with your customer I would call it like acting as a middleman, and proceed that way. Like I said, I only had 2 questions. I hope I answered them correctly. If I missed the boat on exactly what you were asking there, if you could maybe provide additional detail, and that web address right there, resubmit it, and maybe provide additional detail if I didn't directly answer your question. So again, thank everybody for signing in. We appreciate it. Again, this is available on our website under recorded webinar under the resource tab. And mark your calendars for July 20th. Going to look at purchasing services and supplies. So good afternoon, and I will sign off now. And thanks again for listening.